Hey, thanks for tuning in. Real quickly, before we get started, I'd like to thank my friends at Tattoo SEO for making today's episode possible. Tattoo SEO specializes in search engine optimization for tattooers and tattoo shops, so they help you to come up higher in organic online search results for people looking to get tattooed in your area. That's kind of a generic explanation. What they can really do is to help put the clients who are looking for your type of work in front of you. So whether you are a street shop trying to just bring generic business through the door, or a single person private studio focused on large scale custom tattooing, they can drive the customers looking for what you do directly to your door. Now, something else that Tattoo SEO does that I think is invaluable and really sets them apart from any competition is that they can promote you for short periods of time wherever you may be traveling. So if you're like me and you travel to do guest spots or to work at tattoo conventions, they can promote you leading up to the actual event that you're working to ensure that you're actually tattooing at the show rather than twiddling your thumbs and watching everyone else tattoo. I'll give you a real life example. So last year I was offered a booth at a show in Arizona about 3 weeks before the show was actually taking place. So I wanted to go and tattoo, but I hadn't promoted myself for that show leading up. So I had no clients in that part of the country and didn't want to sit around and not tattoo. So I reached out to my buddy Tony Sink at Tattoo SEO and asked if they could help to promote me in the short period of time left leading up to that event. And lo and behold, I was booked solid by the time the event got there. I tattooed all weekend and it was a complete success. So whether you're going to do a week-long guest spot in Southern California, doing a tattoo convention in New York City, they can help to promote you for those periods of time leading up to the events. That is a huge, huge benefit for working with Tattoo SEO. So I definitely recommend that you give these guys a shot by clicking the link below and signing up. You will get 50% off of your first month if you mention that you heard about them on Fireside. Thank you guys for supporting what we do and enjoy the episode.
And then eventually he's like, "Hey, how do you feel about turning this into a whole sleeve?" And I was like, "Well, man, I don't know. I mean, I'm not really trying to come down to Atlanta to get tattooed."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Well, I was hoping that you would come and do a guest spot." And I was like, my little tiny young tattooer heart grew wings, and I was like, "Oh my God, yeah, like that would." Yeah. Oh, that's. So, and he's like, "I think you're a really good example of a young tattooer using the stuff that we talk about in the seminars and using it to grow." And I was filled with all this confidence, and I was like, yeah, that's so flattering. Would you do me the honor of giving me a portfolio critique?
Yeah.
And he gave me this look, and I should have recognized it at the time, but it was a very questioning look of are you sure?
Yeah.
and he was like, okay, and he went through it, and it was it was like an old dot matrix printer or an old typewriter where he would just he just skimmed through all my tattoos and was just no, top to bottom. He read my tattoos like a book and was like, this is wrong. You should have done this here. You did it right over here, but you did it wrong over here.
Yeah.
And then he did that for all of the tattoos in my portfolio, every single one.
That's awesome.
And it was immensely valuable, and that honesty I think is something that you don't always get face-to-face in the tattoo world.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask someone for a portfolio review or what they think of it, so often it's either in front of the client and you're like, well, maybe I should pull my punches a little bit. But, that candor and that honesty and the genuine approach to it, I think is what it's what we really need from people that from people that are at a certain level in tattooing and addressing young people that are trying to do, or young tattooers, not necessarily young people, but and I think that's part of why I have moved toward also including being an educator in who I am as a tattooer.
Yeah.
Because we poo-poo on a lot of tattoos all the time, and
yeah.
My friends call me
We're getting all this, right? So we're going to lead it in. Cool.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And
I'll introduce in a second.
oh, good. Sorry, I was just kind of riffing. I hope that's all right.
Yeah. Well, here, we're going to do it now. Let me give this in. Hey, welcome to the Fireside Tattoo Podcast. Take that. The official podcast, the Fireside Tattoo Network. I'm glad we got all that rolling in. That's my favorite type of episode whenever we don't come in with an intro and we're just
cool.
already rolling. So I'm glad it started that way. So I'm Jake. This is Kelly Severtson.
Hey, guys.
We're at the Roughrider Tattoo Expo. We'll get to all that in just a second. So, yeah, keep going. That's as far as your becoming a tattoo educator, what you're trying to pull from what you learned with those experiences into your own seminars or your own teachings.
Yeah. So, it all kind of, my idea of like what a tattoo educator can be stems a lot from Russ Abbott, right? And just seeing him like work as a human through the process of like trying to figure out how to teach classes to tattooers, right? And I've taken a number of his seminars, a number of his classes, and like he's become a mentor and a friend over the last couple of years. And at some point, Courtney from Roughrider invited me to do a seminar, and I thought like,
this isn't your first year doing a seminar here.
No,
right?
no, I did them last year, and in grad school, I was a graduate assistant. So like I've taught art classes before, but I've never tried to take the principles of tattooing and like string them through the principles of like art and design, and then like there's a new digital wave that's kind of cresting in tattooing right now, and trying to figure out like how to help people like get caught up with that, and that like, and that's like why I'm involved in Tattoo Smart too, and like, but that honesty and that willingness to give a good critique instead of just
pacifying.
Yeah, pacifying, or either just being all negative. It like, my friends jokingly call me the tattoo police, because like I'm not afraid to call any tattoo out on its shortcomings, right? And that's what we need to be doing. Like there's no such thing as a perfect tattoo, and there's no such thing as like an end to the growth as an image maker, or like as a technician in tattooing. Like every single line that we do is a test to our ability to do line work, and like every tattoo that we do, even if it's just like a little sticker of a tattoo, like we have to work in compositional elements. Like we have to be doing good design all the time. We can't just be copying other artwork. Yeah.
When you're approaching your designing your seminars, laying your seminars out, and I wish we had gotten a chance to talk even beforehand. I've done a lot of teaching through this show, and we've done courses. We do all these types of things. But in a live one-on-one, I'm always really interested to hear other people's approach. And like you, I've gone and taken seminars from different people. I've sat through one or two of Russ's seminars. I really, really love storytellers. I think that Jeff Gogwe is maybe one of the best speakers I've ever listened to, because he strings everything through this narrative. And I'm always trying to find this balance of keeping people entertained, and drawing parallels from other situational things and pulling them into tattooing, and then also giving really great content. So a couple of examples, like Russ is a meat and potatoes content kind of guy.
He is very meat and potatoes.
Yeah, Nick Baxter's the same way. He's very he lays things out in a very specific way. Jeff Gogwe meanders. He's a storyteller. He weaves things in and out. And what I'd like to do, and I'm super inexperienced at it, but my goal is to really meld those things together. What are you thinking? Are you a content first kind of approach when you're designing these things? Or are you thinking like, I threw a lot of things at them right there. Maybe I should build a little buffer in here. How do you build it?
The first time I gave the seminar, it was.
And just so people know, your seminars, you did two. One on color theory, one on digital design
this
weekend?
Yeah. And last year it was like, last year I tried to cover like everything. Like not just color theory, or not just like, color interaction, but also like an approach to the fundamentals of art, and like the, the principles of art, and like building tattoos from the ground up, from like just shapes and like just an understanding of how we process images. And it was so much more content than I could have really covered. And I think the majority of the seminars that I've experienced have been really meat and potatoes. Like, and I think it came off as like just a lot to digest. So this year I tried to swing an entirely like an opposite direction, and I tried to stay really conversational with it, and like find things that people can relate to in it, and like I get this, maybe it's just because I'm so like self-deprecating and have such a giant imposter syndrome, but like I want to, throughout it, like, as I'm throwing out information that can be used, like, I want people to understand that, like, I still think that tattooing is really hard. Like,
right.
just because I understand how all this stuff works doesn't mean that, like, I don't struggle with it on a daily basis, or, like, have to go back and, like, remember all the things that, like, that I'm applying, and, like, remember not to do things and remember to do specific things.
Yeah.
I just try to stay really human with it. And so, like, maybe I'm not quite a storyteller yet, because I haven't been tattooing as long as Jeff Gogway, obviously, but, like, but I do think that there's a need to stay really human as, like, as a tattoo educator.
Yeah. I would agree with that, and I feel the exact same way doing my seminar this weekend was on finding your style, kind of finding your own unique mark making, and that came from just years of doing this show with really, really great and established tattooers and people that are 2 years out of their apprenticeship that are grasping at straws, and just kind of standing back and trying to just recognize how people feel coming into the tattoo field. But the struggle that I had with it is I don't have a very defined style personally. Like, you don't just look at my tattoos and go, oh, that's a Jake Meeks. My subject matter is all over the place. I love color and black and gray. I love to experiment. So same as you, I felt a bit like an imposter. So I've approached it in a way of this is a collection of what I feel like I've learned by talking to hundreds of tattooers over the last 6 or 8 years. Yeah. And that's the way that I kind of justify it to myself to feel like I have any confidence to tell anyone else.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. Yeah. And I think maybe I'm wrong about this perception, but my perception is that younger tattooers now, because of how prevalent social media is and how many tattooers are constantly uploading good work, or like work that's worth looking at, they don't do as much traveling and as much, like, talking to established artists as they probably should. So, like, I feel like in the first 5 years of my career, I was just trying to travel and just work next to as many, like, established tattooers as I could, right? And even if it was just, like, getting a tattoo in a spot that I could watch them work, just so I could steal any amount of magic that they were working with. Yeah. And I don't know that I see, like, young tattooers doing that as much anymore. And I think, like, I'm not trying to poo-poo on, like, younger tattooers. I think it's just, like, it's how the tattoo industry has developed. And I think that, like, there's a role because of that for tattoo educators that are well aimed. Yeah. And, like, I want to be one of those tattooers, one of those tattoo educators that is well aimed and well intentioned. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that, and there are more opportunities to travel, and obviously there's more educational content out there than there's ever been before, and I think there's also I'm losing the term, but people feel pressured to identify with a style very quickly early on in their careers. You don't want to look like a beginner because shit, look at how many people are like, I can't tell you how many folks I'm flipping through their portfolio, and they're like a year and a half, 2 years, 3 years in, and they're doing for real, like, solid tattoos. I would have been so overwhelmed, if I had started in this era tattooing, that I think that I would I'd be real hesitant to put myself out there too, and set up next to someone that had been tattooing a long time, or set up next to someone that was teaching seminars. I'd be guarding all of my work, making sure that no one saw me, you know. Oh, totally. I mean, I feel like when I was a young tattooer, I would, like, I just wanted to be like a cave troll. I didn't want anyone to see, like, what I was working on, because I was just trying to. I was just struggling. Like, tattooing is hard.
It's hard. Yeah.
Tattooing is hard.
And how long have you been tattooing?
I just hit 10 years a couple months ago.
So you're doing that. I mean, it's your full-time gig for 10 years, and you're still saying tattooing's hard.
Tattooing is crazy hard. Yeah.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. Talk a little bit about. Along those lines, that story just reminded me. We were talking about Russ, and he told me, this has probably been a year or so ago, that he met a kid who came up and I guess had seen him on one of our episodes or something like that, and wanted to talk to him and wanted to watch him work. And Russ had really crappy lighting, and the kid was like, well, I could just hold my light over you if you don't mind me watching you work. So this kid literally, Russ told me, for like 6 or 8 hours, this kid was like his personal lamp.
No
and, just held a lamp over the top so that he could ask questions and watch him work. It's like, man, that kid's going to be awesome one day. Look at how bold he was to, like,
for real,
walk up to him and be like, hey, I'll just hold a light if you'll let me watch.
Right. I mean, I feel like that's an old mentality, though. Like, I feel like that's how it works.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It was awesome. Yeah, I love the story. So you've done a brush set for Tattoo Smart, and yours is. So let me back up a little bit. Where did the kind of the sorcery and magic kind of subject matter come from? Was that something you did
Oh,
all
yeah.
growing up, or is that new
Yeah.
in tattooing? for you?
Well, I'm a kid of the '80s,
Yeah.
and when I grew up, I mean, I just remember I remember when The Last Unicorn was a new movie.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
and so I guess I've always been drawn toward like fantasy elements, and in particular like that mix of like fantasy illustration and animation, like on the back of like the psychedelic era.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that sort of aesthetic has always really appealed to me. And
So you were drawing that as a kid.
I was drawing stuff like that as a kid.
Yeah.
You know, and there's like there, yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want to go too crazy in depth into it, like too down that wormhole. But like, that mix of like fantasy and like a little bit of like psychedelic stuff. I've been kind of afraid to do it full time because it just seems so like niche and so so personal, and
Yeah.
it's also like kind of has a dated look to it, and it's like it's catching on now. There's like a new bend toward like some kind of like woo woo hippy dippy, like crystal shops are all over the place, and like
yeah. Crystals have made their way into tattooing like crazy lately. They're like I see them all the time in tattoos now.
Yeah.
It seems like it happened overnight.
It did, but yeah, but I've been trying to push that aesthetic in tattooing for like a little while.
Really?
And like trying to just inch toward it, and there's a lot of tattooers now that just have like total careers based on it. And it's pretty cool to see. And it's also pretty cool to know that I've been doing it long enough that I can see the artists that I've influenced. Like,
Yeah.
it's pretty cool to pick out like, oh, that's totally how I draw that, and like,
Yeah.
this person's been following me on Instagram for like
Yeah.
5 years. I'm like,
That is super cool. to
right,
see
it's cool, and like I'm not jealous of it or like butthurt about it or anything. I just think it's cool to be part of the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think Russ, I think Russ was aware of me having been in it and like been. I don't want to be as pretentious as to say like having been that influential in the aesthetic, but like having been a part of the conversation for long enough.
Yeah.
And he was like, I think that it would be totally cool if you did a brush set of that.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like a fun thing to do.
Yeah.
You know, like a good way to get into like another aspect of digital design and another aspect of like where it's kind of like stamp brush sets are kind of the new version of Flash.
Right.
You know, like.
Right.
No one is really buying hand-painted, like spit-shaded
No.
Flash anymore. It's just not really. It's not. You're not buying it and putting it in your shop.
Yeah. We've got an episode actually coming out with Russ in the near future that we did in St. Louis at Tattoo the Lou, and we had this conversation a little bit about the brush sets going from brushes to which I mean they even started scales and things were one of the very early ones, but you could see those being tools that you would draw from. And now I know he's catching some flack and he's addressed it a handful of times about brush sets that are like full on imagery, like you're saying, they're flash sets basically. Right. And how people are using them, and there's a lot of debate back and forth, a lot of conversation about whether or not it's it's a complete cheat to like just like drop a brush stroke and pull one of Eddie Stacy's birds in and be like, sweet, I'm tattooing that, which I mean you could do that if you wanted to, or you could use it as a starting point to build something further. Have you had any feedback from your people that keep up with you or on having basically a flash set?
Yeah, I mean it is. That's what it is. It's a flash set, and that's like how I drew it in mind. I've had a lot of conversations about it with a lot of different tattooers, and I think that a lot of tattooers are nervous about it being copycatted, but I think that we do that anyway.
Yeah,
and that's like that's not to excuse or like pardon any amount of like the trace master element, but like how many times have like do we want to say that like the traditional artists of old, like the grandfathers of tattooing, like is it okay to do a Sailor Jerry pinup just because
Yeah.
it's old. Like
Right.
it's
Yeah.
the same thing.
Right.
It's like, we learn and we do a specific thing. Like if you want to use a brush set, like if you want to use a stamp and tattoo it and not credit the person that it came from, like that's on you and that's a dick move.
Right.
But like,
Yeah.
but to say that like there aren't thousands of tattooers that are just tracing off of the first page of Google and making a living doing it
Yeah.
is a little naive and a little ignorant.
Yeah.
Like and that's again not to excuse it, but like there's nothing wrong with making a drawing and dispersing it, or like even buying a flash set that has been dispersed for that purpose and like learning how to draw. Like I don't know many people that are like established tattoo career or that are established career tattooers that have just only been doing tracing. Like you do a thing, you get a drawing, you get an image, and you draw from it.
Yeah.
That's the majority of what's happening.
Right. And it's funny. What were the variables that changed that when you present it as, well, yeah, it's basically a flash set. No one ever had an issue with Cherry Creek Flash in their studios in the 90s. We all tattooed it like crazy. There were tons of stuff. I think it's just it must be just that subtlety of calling it first a brush set.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because that makes it sound like it's a tool for you to create something.
Right.
When actually you're dropping a full-on image. Maybe that's the point that crosses where people go like, oh, that's not a brush set, that's flash set. We'll call it what it is. Is that it? I don't know.
Maybe. For some reason there seems to be a really big wall in perception between like buying a flash image, like buying a painting of a flash set,
Yeah.
and tracing over one of them and then making a stencil from it, versus just clicking and then printing it out and making a stencil. But that to me seems like a very, very arbitrary wall.
Yeah.
Like if you can't tattoo, you're not going to do a good tattoo just because you had a stamp brush.
Right.
Like that's not. You still have to learn how to do it.
Right.
And
Yeah. And I think even, you and I could take the exact same stamped image and make a tattoo from it and end up with entirely different results based on a line drawing. You know what I mean? Based on the line drawing that we started with.
Massively different.
So there's no like I honestly I don't get the issue with it. I think that as the industry evolves and as technology like roots deeper and deeper into it, you get more and more people, or not necessarily more people, more vocal people digging their heels in and trying to hold on to what was important to them, and I guess that's basically all it is. Our the seminar that I did this weekend, like I said, was on finding your style, and the thing that I'm always trying to experiment with in my own work is how do I steal the coolest things from the people that I look up to, not just in tattooing, but I mean I follow a lot of painters, a lot of fine artists as well, and like how do I categorize the things that I think they do well, and then make them in my own kind of unique way, use them in my own unique way.
Yeah.
And this is just another way, like you're saying, you could just print it and trace it and do it if you want to, but the more interesting way, and if your goal is to is to be a great tattooer or a great artist, then obviously you're always trying to explore. So the more interesting way to use it is to use it as a reference piece, even if you're just pulling it into Photoshop and using a mesh tool or something, like tweaking it or fish-eyeing it or whatever. You're doing something to it, right?
Yeah, I fully agree.
Yeah.
I don't think that there's I find zero problem with the idea behind flash sets having morphed into these like stamp brushes and producing like a brush set of them. I just don't think that there's I just don't have any moral issue with it or like any ethical issue.
Yeah.
There's tiers in tattooing, and like if you want to break out into like the next greatest tier, you can't hold on to your old ways.
Yeah.
And
it's a great way to look at it.
like if you want to be a great tattooer, you're not going to get there by tracing. If you want to be a good tattooer, you probably have to at least understand what makes a good tattoo. And if doing flash gets you there, then it does.
Right.
And if that's where you end, then that's where you end. And like, I'm posting my work to Instagram. There's nothing to stop anyone from stealing it.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's not cool, clearly, but like, I don't know, but it's always been happening. Like the number of people that I can say have told me stories about like, oh, I picked up a tattoo magazine, 12 years ago, and like there was this one piece on the cover, and like I couldn't see it, but like I drew it with a magnifying glass, and it's like that's the same thing.
Right.
It's just through like more processes. It's through more steps. Like all we do is like, as artists, like our ability to produce art is ever chasing our taste for good art, right? And that's like, as you develop your taste and it like moves in different directions, like the more effort and intent you put into your art, it chases it, And the moment that we are satisfied with what we're doing, like when our taste lines up with our ability to produce, that's the end of our growth.
Right.
And how we get to our taste, like how we're able to approach it and chase behind it, is really just personal story.
Yeah.
I don't know if that makes any sense. That's big and meandering. But
yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I've always felt like, I come to these shows and I throw my portfolio out and I'm like, oh, I really need to update that. I really need to update that piece. That was a couple of years ago, and what I've learned as I go through and do this every so often is if I'm not embarrassed by the work that I did 3 or 4 years ago, then something's wrong. I quit. So,
yeah, exactly.
So somewhere along the way, I got off track.
Yeah.
But let's go back to teaching seminars. Are you? So I recorded mine just for my own benefit to hear if I meander, because I do have a bad habit of like getting off on tangents, and I didn't want it to get too wordy. Will you go back and critique yourself and try to like condense or try to make clearer points, or do you have it down to a point now that you feel comfortable with doing the?
This time I didn't record them, and I brought a camera to do it, but the classes were they were small. Like this isn't a huge convention, but it's they were small, and I thought like, you know what, instead of trying to just go by the book, I'm just gonna try to make my points and open this up as like a conversation.
That's the same approach, yeah.
So I didn't really stick to any sort of like real game plan. There were a couple times where I totally changed what I was doing. Like someone in my class on color theory like brought up an interesting idea, and we just chased it. Probably for 30 minutes.
Yeah.
Right, and it was about like trying to pick using digital tools to like determine what your favorite tattooers are using in their palette, right? And trying to like identify the palettes and the compositions that they're using.
Yeah.
And I hadn't really thought about putting that as part of the class, and it ended up being a really cool tool that like we were able, like as a group of 10 of us, like to kind of develop.
Yeah.
And it was cool, and it gave a really good. It was something that I hadn't expected, and I'm glad that I was open to it. But it wasn't something I planned on.
Yeah, I love that too, and I think it just you have to be really confident and prepared and have a solid understanding of your subject matter and what you're talking about to go off that way, I think.
Yeah.
And this is one that I'm still kind of exploring, but I do love doing that. I think that we end up learning as much as they do whenever you start going down that path. I just recently we're looking at maybe doing an online version of this course with Andy. Do you know Andy Chambers?
Yeah.
So I think he and I may do an online version that's just for large-scale color illustrative work.
Super
that's
cool.
going to be a finder style. And I was watching him. He's done this seminar a couple of times. This kind of advanced sleeve design or advanced large-scale. He's such a confident draftsman, though, that he's like pulling up, kind of like Russ does, pulling up on the Cintiq, and he's like, all right, here's what we have. We've got a dragon, we've got a this and a that, and we present it to the client, and it's the day of, and like, oh, and they don't like this element, but it's one of the major elements. Like, what? Give me something else we can drop in here. And so someone from the crowd throws out like, oh, make it a bird or whatever. So he's like, all right, so we don't want that. We're going to do a bird instead. And so then he just talks about from a compositional shape, value, edge kind of standpoint, like how he would build a bird and how it would affect other things. And he's so confident in just his drawing. I mean, he's like a master draftsman. So he can just make these changes on the fly. And I'm like, that is the ultimate like seminar. Like it's so
great.
Interactive, and you watch these things unfold, and there's no artist, no matter the level of the artist in the crowd, there's no one that doesn't gain from that.
Yeah.
And I think to me that's kind of the ultimate goal in this is if we're going to be really great educators is like we just have to really know it and and be able to adjust on the fly based on different interactions and different ideas.
Yeah, when I was going through my own work, like in the last couple of years, to bring stuff up in the class, to be like, okay, I can show a couple like different versions or different like color schemes and whatnot, and talk about like why I did it. There were a couple pieces that I like had been pretty proud of, where I was like, I didn't actually do a great job of like sticking to my own like the stuff that I'm teaching in this, and I was like, well, I'm gonna include them and talk about like the ways that I could have improved it.
Yeah.
Like, being really, being confident in what you're talking about, but then also being like, really open to the fact that you don't always hit it.
Yeah.
I bet though that Andy Chambers always does a really badass drawing.
Yeah, I mean, he always draws. Yeah, I had a really interesting conversation with him at Tattoo the Lou. It was like midnight. We're sitting at the bar, and he was like, "Oh, I need to get back to my room. I have to draw a leg sleeve for tomorrow." I was like, "You haven't drawn it? Like, what is it?" He's like, "It's like dragons and a dragon and skulls." And I was like, "Holy shit, you haven't drawn it at all?" And he's like, "No." He said, "But I can draw I could draw a dragon sleeve in probably an hour and a half." He's like, but he was like, the thing is, like, it's whether or not I want to draw that dragon that I can already draw and everyone will be happy with, or should I draw 3 dragon sleeves and try to present it in a way that I've never done it before? And he's like, and that's what I'm always trying to do. And so, of course, he's like an insomniac, I guess, and doesn't sleep, and he draws really quickly, and he's super efficient. But just someone at his level that's still, it's midnight, and he's like, I might try to draw 3 dragon sleeves to make sure that I can present it in a way that's interesting enough to me that I'm engaged in it tomorrow, and it's not the dragon that I know I can do well.
Right.
It's like, wow, that's where the bar is right now.
That's compelling, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. That's like, oh, wow. So, every minute that I sit here and talk to other tattooers, I'm probably losing ground on Andy Chambers, which is fine.
Honestly, I came back from some travels this summer and got back to my home shop, and an artist that I work with, I'm going to plug him right now, is Rob Goodkind. He's super good.
Goodkind?
Rob Goodkind,
okay.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, like, what have you been up to? And he's like, I've just been drawing dragons. Here's 37 dragons that I drew. I'm just like, what? Like,
yeah.
And
that's awesome.
That's, yeah, I mean, you're totally right. That's where the bar is. Like, there's so many good illustrators that are just coming to tattooing right now, and like, yeah,
it's just incredible. We were in Richmond last weekend or weekend before, and there were all of these. Jesse Smith has this like a charity foundation where he had maybe 8 or 10 really great illustrators, wouldn't you say? Like Gary Villarreal and Esau, and I mean, just high level illustrators and painters that had these giant canvases they painted on all weekend, and then every time I turn around, they're like taking a break and they're up like watching Phil Garcia work, and they're talking back and forth, and I'm like, look at this huge melting pot of talent that's
awesome.
Interacting. These guys aren't tattooers, but they're like completely compelled with what Gunner's working on, or with what whoever's working on, and then you turn around and you see Baxter out there watching them paint. It's like, this is crazy what's happening in the tattoo world. And how all these high level people are working together and passing around ideas, and it's just a different world.
I think we're in a pretty cool like renaissance, or maybe our own little golden age of tattooing.
Yeah, I agree.
Where there's just the talent, like the pool of talent is just deep.
Yeah. And we wonder, we hear a lot and we talk a lot about bubbles in tattooing, and does it become a trend that starts to go downhill? Do we have a generation of kids that come up whose parents are tattooed, and the cops are tattooed, and their teachers are tattooed, and not kind of tattooed, like heavily tattooed.
Right.
And they just go like, fuck all that, I'm done with this. Like, I don't have no end. But I think as long as the bar is being raised from an artistic standpoint, more likely, to me, the evolution continues it just expands. There are more and more options of being tattooed. I hope that's the way it goes.
I mean, like, there will probably be a trend of people wanting less tattoos, just because there's no such thing as like constant growth.
Yeah.
But like, but I think that the quality of tattooing that's not gonna slow down.
No.
I think even in like, not to critique too heavily a style, but even like the recent like black work stuff that's like really simple, and that's maybe like a callback to what tribal was in the 90s.
Yeah.
But that hasn't slowed down any amount of like design or like intention or attention that they are putting into their work.
No.
It's just different, and that is I see people merging that stuff back in. Like it all just becomes, the conversation just gets bigger.
Yeah.
And so then you're right. Like tattooing will just keep expanding.
Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's a great point with tribal and seeing how it's gone into some of the geometry or into some of the really like pattern based kind of black work. And we did a podcast with a guy. We spent like a week at Guru Tattoo, Aaron Dellavedova shop.
Who doesn't know Guru Tattoo?
Yeah, right.
If you don't know Guru Tattoo, learn.
Wrong, right?
Yeah.
So we spent a week there podcasting and tattooing, and I met a guy who I did not know named Rory Keating, and he learned from what's his name, the master, like the who brought what we know as American kind of tribal tattooing.
Leo Zuleta?
Leo Zuleta. Yeah. He learned directly from Leo, and he is still like, I'm flipping through his portfolio, and he's doing like Celtic knotwork and straight up 90s tribal. And I'm like, how often are you doing this in San Diego? And he was like, every day. I'm like the only person that does it. And I was like, yeah, but do people come in for it every day? And he was like, yeah, all the time. Like, that's awesome. That's great news to me. I love it. I don't want to do any of it, but I love that it's happening, Yeah. It's so cool. But well, man, so where do people go if they want to keep up with you, and how are you booking, and how far, or like if people want to get tattooed?
Oh, I don't book out that far. I don't really want to book out like a bunch of months. All my friends that are booked out like 8 months, they're miserable.
Yeah.
So I'd rather just not. But it's pretty easy to get in with me, and I book.
You're out of Chicago, right?
Yeah, Chicago.
Yeah.
I work at Goodkind Tattoo with Rob Goodkind.
Okay.
And a bunch of other dope tattooers.
Yeah. Is Tim Bedron still in Chicago?
Tim Bedron is still in Chicago, just hiding.
Yeah.
Just hiding.
Got to get him on the show. I'm so happy he's on social media. He was gone for so long. He used to. So I worked at a shop in the '90s called Underground Art that was one of the few. There were only like 10 or 12 conventions total in the whole country at that point. So we were able to meet people like Tim and Guy Aitchison, Randy Muller, and all these guys from different parts of the country that just traveled together.
What a time.
Oh, yeah. And so they all did guest spots. So we had Tim. There's really great fishing. I'm in Memphis, Tennessee. There's great fishing in the area. And Tim's always been a big fisherman. He had some friends in like northern Mississippi, which is real close. So he would come down and tattoo for a few days and then go fish for a week and then head back to Chicago. So I've like so lucky to have gotten to watch him work when he was 15 or more years ago. But I haven't seen him I went without seeing him for so long, and then I noticed that he was on Instagram. I was like, oh.
One of the coolest parts about being in Chicago and the way that Tim Bedron works, where he doesn't post like very rarely. Like I don't even know if it's 1 out of 20 pieces that he does.
Yeah.
But it's really cool to be in Chicago and to hang out and to see pieces live, right?
Yeah.
Like there's a cool magical circumstance of like never having seen a cool tattoo, knowing immediately who did it based on the style and like the quality of work, and then just getting to experience it your first time, like in skin.
Yeah,
it's like it doesn't really happen like that often anymore. Like I feel like when I see good tattoos in the wild, I'm like, I think I've seen that. Yeah. Like I think I've seen that online.
Yeah,
and I guess that's maybe its own little magical experience, but like. Seeing Tim Bedron pieces in the wild is basically the only way that you can see them, and it's cool to be able to see them.
Yeah, I bet that would be I would be ecstatic to see his pieces out in the wild that you would never see otherwise. He's not going to post them or whatever. I still tattoo around a couple of guys who have pieces from him back when I know he doesn't like to do any color work anymore, but I mean some of the most beautiful, soft, buttery like color that he was doing in the 90s. He was the first person, or early 2000s probably, but he was the first person that introduced me to using these really muted kind of off tones. Everything I used at that point was straight out of the tube.
For sure.
I was using like a royal blue and then a teal blue and then whatever, and they were I was rarely mixing. And he's mixing like yellows and blacks and hitting a little white and getting these really milky weird greens and then popping this little like salmony color against it, and you're just like, oh, what is that? It's great. It was like magic at that point in time.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he's working with some weird palettes, man.
Yeah.
And like really making it work.
Yeah.
The dude is, for all of his avoidance of color now, like
I wonder why that is. He's so good at it.
I don't know. I don't know what it's like to be Tim Bedron. That dude is crazy good, and and so influential to a lot of like illustrative tattoos now.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't a lot of people don't know it, you know, because he hasn't had a digital presence, you know. So there's like a lot of young tattooers that are referencing people that referenced Tim Biedron.
Right.
And, you know, he's got like he has like a really deep lineage in like just tattoo influence. Like, you know, his roots have spread far.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? How that works with him being completely disconnected from the digital age to start, but then how it still seeped into so much of other illustrative tattooers' work. So I didn't mean to go too far on a Tim Biedron tangent, although I'm always happy to do that.
Right.
Tim, if you want to come on the show, I would love it. So you intentionally try not to book too far out. You like to have a little freedom.
I do. I mean, I like to be able to travel. I like to be able to travel with like maybe a month's notice or something like that, you know, and I don't want to have to rearrange a bunch of scheduling for it.
I see that more and more. You know, there used to be kind of a pride in being booked a long ways out. Like, oh, sorry, you know, 3 years before you can even talk to me about a tattoo. And I think that the more cool things that are happening in the world, the more that tattooers are realizing, like, oh, I don't want to be locked into my home studio. I mean, I've had the problem of being invited to events, you know, like this. Like the reason I came here whenever I got the invite was like, oh, how else would I end up in Fargo? Like I'm nowhere near Fargo. Right. And I had another invite this year to Bangor, Maine, but I was already booked at home and I couldn't do it. I was like, well, I'll never go to Bangor, Maine for any other reason. Why would I wish I could do that? And I find that more and more. Jesse Smith, I've mentioned this a couple of times on the show. People might be tired of hearing it, but I love it. I was talking to him about booking, and he treats his books like a timeshare. So he'll only book 3 months, but if you own the first Monday of the month, that's your Monday as long as you want it. And so you'll book, you know, the 3 months.
That's a good idea.
Yeah, and then when you finish that sleeve, so many people were like, oh, you know, I really want to start. I want to pull this over my back, or I want to start another sleeve. Well, if you want it, that's just yours as long as you want it. As soon as you give that day up, then someone else falls into that day. But for him, it keeps him like his most reliable clientele end up keeping the same days for sometimes years on end because they finish a back and they want to pull it over their chest or whatever it is. So he knows. They know that they're locked in with him. He knows that he has reliable people, but he's still only 3 months out.
That's a clever idea.
I thought so too. I really liked it. So I haven't adopted it, but I think I might.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm probably gonna do that.
Yeah.
That's a really, really good idea.
Yeah. I love it. So where people can keep up with you? Where best way is email?
The best way is Instagram.
Instagram. Okay.
I try to answer my messages pretty promptly. Yeah. I'm horrendous at emailing.
Yeah.
But
you'll respond to DMs on Instagram.
Yep, you can slide into my DMs at any time.
Awesome, sweet. I'll make sure we drop those in the show notes so people can get in touch with you if they want. Man, that was a blast. I enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, likewise.
Yeah, so thank you guys for supporting what we do. Thanks to Roughrider Tattoo Expo for having us out. We'll see you guys next time.
Peace out.